Police Commissioner Osborn Robinson III. Good to have you aboard, sir.
Good morning, Gary. How are you?
I'm honored to have you with us. Thank you so much. And, of course, Dave Lash, who is becoming a veteran here, Northern Regional Police Chief. Dave, good to have you aboard again.
Hey, good morning, Gary. Thanks for having us on again this morning.
Well, thanks for having all three of you. And, again, interesting and difficult times that we live in here in the entire country at the moment. Obviously, COVID-19, if that wasn't bad enough, now we add the situation of Mr. Floyd being killed in Minneapolis and people reacting around the country. And so we're trying to understand policing during this time. We're trying to understand what led to the kinds of protests during this time. We're seeing all kinds of, and I have to be careful in this, we're seeing these kinds of incidents spawning these kinds of reactions around the country from time to time. And I'm going to start with Police Commissioner Robinson. You got to see it here in New York last night, and I know you were out in front of that talking to people. Commissioner Robinson, talk a little bit about that and your reaction to last night's protest here in New York. We did have one car and one person, I understand, who were affected in a very negative way. Outside of that, it seemed like a pretty peaceable rally.
Yeah, other than that, it was peaceful. We did have a situation where we had a marked car that was damaged in front of the police station and also an unmarked car. Interestingly enough, we were inside when that happened, and I know when it was someone that drove by on one of the incidents in a car and threw something out the window, and even the protesters out there at that point threw something back at that car. By and large, it was peaceful. It got boisterous at times, but that's what a protest is. We just urge the community as they come out today and the rest of the week that they maintain peace as they conduct their constitutional right to protest.
Let me ask all three of you this question, and I'll start with you again here on this, Commissioner Robinson. One of the things you said last night, you said, I am still a black man. And you come from Baltimore. For a lot of people in this country, the first reaction is kind of a knee-jerk reaction one way or the other. It's to say, oh, the police are all doing this all the time. And then there's the other side of the coin where people say, oh, my gosh, look at this. These people are rioting over one person dying and so forth. There's somewhere in between here. You've lived in Baltimore. You've lived the life as a person of color. I mean, I'm going to get right down to the nitty-gritty here. What are we missing here as a population in all this? Is this the norm? How should we view this whole situation? What are we looking for here?
Can you kind of give me a little more context than when you say?
I guess what I'm looking for here is when we look at the protests nationally, okay, and we say, okay, all of us have seen the different situations around the country that have happened from time to time. And the Freddie Gray thing in Baltimore a couple years ago, we saw this. Anytime someone loses their life, it's tragic. And a fellow human being. And I guess my point is, we're watching these protests now. What do people want from the protests? I'm not terribly big on the symbolic stuff. I'm more big on what are we doing to get at the root of a problem and correct it. And I guess that's what I'm looking for here.
I guess ultimately, discriminatory practices are at the very crux of our country.
Okay.
And it's no way around that situation. It's not as if our country wasn't built on discriminatory practices. Mm-hmm. It's not as if we have somehow at some point in time corrected those wrongs, and it's not as if when you watch all the different in-custody deaths, all the other discriminatory practices, even outside of law enforcement, in any other industry,
right,
in any other business that continues to happen, all of those things fuel the fire. Mm-hmm. And, when you have an incident as inflammatory as the death of George Floyd,
right,
it's one of those things that, from a perspective of an African-American male in America, and watching it, and listen to some of the comments made by others on Facebook and the news, by law enforcement, it's very interesting. I was reading a Facebook post of a guy that I attended Northwestern University's police staff and command course with, and he started off talking about how it was a tragic incident, and that doesn't represent law enforcement. And as soon as he finished those first few sentences, the next thing he said was, "That said," and then the next 2 or 3 paragraphs went on to talk about and characterize protesters as animals, unnecessary, and things like that. So the question becomes, when you see the protesting in this particular, in the context of George Floyd, for the most part, you see people of color. And that's not to say that they're the only ones out there. That's not to say that they're the ones that are starting to break all the windows and set fires, as we've seen in other protests.
Right.
But again, you have this context of who the protesters are, and that connotation being connected to people of color. Now, the interesting thing is, when Colin Kaepernick took a knee, he lost his job.
Right.
Right? So that was as peaceful as it can get. When we protest and when certain cities go up in flames, then that's an issue too. So what is the recourse to address discriminatory practices?
And the recourse is, first of all, the uniting thing should have been all of us recoiling and saying, if that were me, no matter what differences we have in our country, if that were me, wouldn't we recoil in unity at a policeman doing that? And we've since found that he died as a result of that pressure that was put on his neck with a knee. I mean, that ought to unite every person in this country and say, well, that's wrong. I mean, that is absolutely wrong. We have Osborn Robinson, who is the police commissioner of York City. We've got Dave Sunday, the district attorney of York County. We've got Dave Lash, the chief of the Northern Regional Police. Dave, I want to ask you a question, and I was just going off the back end of what Police Commissioner Robinson said a moment ago. How do you eliminate biases when you bring people into your police force? In your case, Northern York County Regional Police. How do you do that? Because obviously we saw the situation in Minneapolis. We've seen it in other places around the country. I think in any business you have, you're going to have people who come in who are, just they don't do a good job for whatever reason. I mean, it can happen in any business that we have, and yet with the police, it's a different kind of relationship that we have in our community. I don't know if I've asked you a very good question there, but I'll let you kind of take a shot at the answer.
Everybody has implicit bias. Eliminating it is probably not possible in our daily lives, no matter what walk we're in, but managing it. And I think it really comes down to, in the department, is the culture, the training, the policy, communication from management, effective first-line supervisors who are out checking on the guys doing their jobs, discipline, accountability, and being transparent. When all of these are institutionalized as part of that department's culture, the risk of the outcomes that are happening right now on television are reduced, and hopefully public confidence is increased. We took steps about 5 years ago to implement a program that's called RITE training, RITE, which is racial intelligence and emotional training. And even though it has the word racial in it as the first word, it's not necessarily on dealing with different races. It's just dealing with humans in general. And we teach this class to all of our incoming officers. All of our current officers get an update on it on a yearly basis. And it really teaches the factors of understanding the emotional portion of incidents. We go into incidents with certain emotions, and obviously when we're dealing with people, they're in an emotional high state as well. So we're teaching people about de-escalation and understanding different forms of harassment and bringing people back down to a level where we can effectively deal with them. The implicit bias will be there. It's just a matter of being able to manage and minimize it.
Commissioner Robinson, with the York City Police Force, obviously you've come here from Baltimore. You're bringing a wealth of experience. What kind of things are you doing there in terms of, getting everybody on the same wavelength, so to speak, and being preventative and proactive in terms of your approach there?
One of the things that I'm doing is reviewing the policies. One of the things that I noticed is that not all, but many of the policies haven't been touched in years. And so what I found when I initially came, when I had to deal with one of my first discipline cases, is that some of the policies, and if not policies, the culture of the organization to conduct business based on practice with no true understanding of where the practice came from.
Okay.
So one of the things that I'm building now in terms of within the culture is there's no such thing as I'm doing it just because we've always done it. Because policies are implemented, training is implemented, and tactics are implemented based on conditions of our environment. And as a result of those conditions, we try to identify the best practices. And so that's one of the things that I've brought to it. Another thing is technology. When it's 2020 and coming to York City PD, I was sort of caught off guard that everything is still done on paper. There are no databases really being used. There are no software being used specifically with internal affairs cases, with use of force cases that allow you to track the cases, monitor individuals, and also flag situations as folks who are frequently involved in either of those situations. So I just purchased a software called Benchmark that will allow me to do just that. And what was even more alarming is a part of the discipline system was captured at the local level, meaning at first-line supervisor level in a file like we did 20, 30 years ago.
Okay. So updating practices here. And Osborn Robinson, who is the police commissioner of York City, with Dave Lash, the Northern Regional Police Chief,